They never told you the truth about rich people. They never said that the real difference is not money, not education, not even luck. The true difference is the way they think, the way they see the world, the way they see themselves, and the way they see opportunity. While most people wake up every day thinking about survival, rich people wake up thinking about growth. While most people say, "I can't," rich people ask, "How can I?" That single question has silently built empires, changed lives, and rewritten destinies. You have probably blamed your past, your country, your family, your English, your lack of chances. But what if I told you that those were never the real problem? What if the real prison was inside your own mind? Every day you walk past opportunities, but you don't recognize them because your thinking has been trained to look for problems, not possibilities. You hear a new English word, and you think, "This is too hard for me." A rich mindset hears the same word and thinks, "This will make me stronger." This story is not just about money. This story is about becoming someone new. Someone who thinks bigger, someone who speaks better, someone who walks into the world with quiet confidence instead of silent doubt. If you keep listening, your old way of thinking will start to feel small, uncomfortable, and impossible to return to. Because once your mind changes, your life has no choice but to follow. This is the beginning of your new way of thinking. Chapter 1. The first thought that changed everything. He was not born rich. In fact, he grew up in a small, silent house where money was always a problem and dreams felt like dangerous things people should not talk about. Every night, he heard his parents whisper about bills, about food, about how tomorrow would be harder than today. Those whispers slowly entered his mind and became his own thoughts. Life is hard, he believed. Success is for other people. English is too difficult for me. These sentences repeated in his head so many times that they felt like facts, not just thoughts. At school, when the teacher asked questions in English, he looked down at his desk. He already knew he would not answer. Not because he did not know, but because he was afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of being laughed at. Afraid of confirming what he already believed about himself. So he stayed quiet. And every time he stayed quiet, that silent habit grew stronger. Silence became his comfort zone. Lack of confidence became his identity. That was the poor mind speaking. Not poor in money, but poor in belief. One day, on the way home, he stopped in front of a bookstore. He had walked past it 1,000 times, but this time was different. A book in the window caught his attention. The title said, "Your mind is your greatest asset." He didn't know why, but those words stayed with him. Asset. He had heard that word in English class. It meant something valuable, something that grows. But nobody had ever told him that his mind could be an asset. He always thought his mind was his weakness. He stood there for a long time, looking at his own reflection in the glass. He saw the same poor clothes, the same tired eyes, the same unsure face. But behind that reflection, he noticed something new. A question. And that question was small but powerful. What if I am wrong about myself? That one question is where rich thinking begins. Rich people do not have all the answers, but they always question their old beliefs. While others say, "This is just how I am," rich thinkers say, "This is who I am right now, but who can I become?" That shift is not magic. It is mindset. He didn't even go into the store that day. He didn't buy the book. Yet something had already changed. That night, as he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, his usual negative thoughts did not feel as comfortable as before. They felt old, weak, almost like lies. For the first time, he imagined a different version of himself. One who spoke English confidently. One who walked into rooms without fear. One who thought about success as something normal, not impossible. The next morning, when the alarm rang, something strange happened. He didn't immediately reach for his phone and scroll mindlessly like he used to. Instead, he sat up and whispered one sentence in English. "I am becoming better every day." The words felt awkward in his mouth. Unnatural. But even that discomfort was a sign of growth. Because growth is never comfortable. Rich people understand that discomfort is not pain, it is progress. At school that day, he listened differently. Not as a hopeless student, but as a learner. Every English word sounded like a tool, not a weapon. When the teacher spoke, he didn't say, "I can't understand." He said, "I am training my ears." That small change in language, in inner conversation, began to reshape his entire world. The classroom did not change. The teacher did not change. The book did not change. Only one thing changed, his thinking. And thinking creates reality. He realized that rich people do not wait for motivation. They create discipline. They do not wait to feel confident. They build confidence through action. They do not run from failure. They study it. They use it. They turn it into power. A poor mind says, "I failed." A rich mind says, "I just learned something valuable." That day, he raised his hand for the first time. His heart was beating so fast that he could hear it in his ears. The room felt quiet. Everyone was looking at him. In broken English, with shaking hands and nervous breath, he answered the question. It was not perfect. His grammar was wrong. His pronunciation was messy. But something greater than perfection happened in that moment. He proved to himself that he was no longer the same person. That single action broke years of silent fear. He sat down, and for a moment, the world looked different. The same classroom now felt like a training ground. The same English words now felt like keys. The same future that once looked dark and narrow now looked wide and open. He didn't become rich that day. Not in money. But he became rich in something greater, belief. And belief is where every rich life begins. This was the first thought that changed everything. I am not here to survive. I am here to grow. And that thought will now change your story too. Chapter 2: The Discipline That Built a New Mind. Change does not arrive with fireworks. It does not knock loudly on your door and announce, "Your life is now different." Real change is quieter than that. It slips into your routine, hides inside small decisions, and waits to see if you are serious enough to keep going when nobody is watching. That is what he slowly began to understand after that first brave moment in the classroom. Raising his hand was not the victory. It was only the beginning of the real battle, the battle between his old habits and his new self. For years, his mind had been trained in weakness without him even knowing it. Every time he said, "later," every time he chose comfort over effort, every time he avoided something difficult, he was strengthening the wrong part of his brain. The part that loved safety. The part that feared change. The part that kept life small. And now, after that first shift in mindset, he could finally see his enemy clearly. It was not the world. It was not English. It was not his family or his past. It was the untrained mind inside him. So he made a quiet decision. A decision that nobody else heard. A decision that did not impress anyone. But that would eventually change everything. He decided to become disciplined, not motivated. Motivated people start strong and stop fast. Disciplined people start small and continue forever. Every morning, before the world woke up, before the noise, before the excuses, he opened his eyes and reached for an English book instead of his phone. His brain resisted. His body resisted. Every part of him tried to pull him back into the old life. "You are tired. Just 5 more minutes. This is useless." That was the poor mind screaming for control. But he remembered something important. Rich people do not negotiate with weakness. They give it no voice. He read 1 page. Slowly. Carefully. He didn't understand all the words. At first, that made him angry. In the past, he would have closed the book and declared it too difficult. But now he did something different. He respected the difficulty. He whispered, "This is my next level." And when something is your next level, you don't run from it. You rise to it. He wrote down new words in a small notebook. 10 words every day. Not 20. Not 50. Just 10. Small targets. Big consistency. That is rich thinking. Poor thinking wants fast results. Rich thinking wants permanent results. And permanent results are built through repetition. He said the words out loud even when nobody was around. At first his voice sounded strange to his own ears. His accent bothered him. His tongue felt stiff. He felt stupid talking to the wall. But then he realized another powerful truth. Only beginners feel stupid. Masters feel focused. And to become a master, you must first accept looking like a beginner. While others were scrolling through endless videos, laughing at meaningless jokes, drowning in distraction, he was training his future. He was investing in a version of himself that did not exist yet. That is what separates rich-minded people from the rest. They live for the person they are becoming, not the person they are right now. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. There were times he wanted to quit. Not because he was tired, but because he was changing. And the mind hates change. It prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar growth. That is why so many people stay exactly where they are. They confuse comfort with happiness. They choose a small, known life instead of a big, unknown one. But every time he felt like giving up, he returned to that first question in front of the bookstore window. What if I am wrong about myself? And slowly, the answer was becoming clearer. He was wrong. He was not weak. He was untrained. He was not bad at English. He was just inexperienced. He was not unlucky. He was just unprepared. And preparation is a choice. In class, something else began to change. He didn't just listen anymore. He observed. He watched the confident students. Not with jealousy, but with curiosity. How did they speak? How did they sit? How did they think? He started copying their habits, not their personalities. Rich people don't copy success. They copy systems. They copy discipline. They copy mindset. He noticed that the best students did not panic when they made mistakes. They laughed. They corrected themselves. They tried again. So he did the same. Each mistake became a lesson. Each correction became a small victory. And every small victory stacked on top of another, slowly building a new identity inside him. One afternoon, as he was walking home, he realized something beautiful and terrifying at the same time. His thoughts were no longer filled with limits. They were now filled with plans. Not dreams. Not wishes. Plans. I will learn 5 new words tonight. I will speak English for 5 minutes in front of the mirror. I will listen to 1 English audio before sleep. I will become fluent. These sentences were replacing the old ones. The negative inner voice was getting weaker. The new voice was getting stronger. That voice was not soft. It was not emotional. It was firm, calm, certain. That was the voice of a rich mindset being born. And one more truth became clear to him. Rich people do not wait for their life to change before they change their thinking. They change their thinking first, and life has no choice but to follow. Every disciplined action he took was a message to the universe, to life, to God, and most importantly, to himself. I respect my future. And when you respect your future starts respecting you back. By the end of that chapter of his life, he was still in the same town, same house, same school, same face. But inside his mind, a whole world had already transformed. He was no longer thinking like a poor boy trying to escape life. He was thinking like a rich man preparing to build it. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 3, the day he stopped thinking small. There is a moment in every person's life that changes everything. Not because the world changes, but because the person finally sees the world differently. For a long time, he believed success belonged to other people. To people born in rich families. To people with perfect English. To people who lived in big cities and had connections, money, and power. He used to imagine success as something far away, like a star in the sky, beautiful but unreachable. But now, something inside him was shifting. Slowly, quietly, powerfully. It began on a normal, ordinary day. Nothing special. No magic. No miracle. Just another walk through the city, another crowd of faces, another sky that looked exactly the same. And yet, inside his mind, a storm of new thoughts was forming. As he passed a tall glass building, he stopped for a moment. Inside, he could see people in clean suits, carrying laptops, speaking in fluent English, laughing confidently, living the kind of life he used to think was not for people like me. Before, he would have lowered his head and walked away. But this time, he looked longer. He studied them, not with jealousy, not with hate, but with a new kind of fire in his eyes. If they are human and I am human, then the only difference is thinking and skills. and all skills can be learned. That thought echoed in his mind like thunder. That was the day he stopped thinking small. That was the day he stopped seeing himself as someone who watches successful people, and started seeing himself as someone who could become one of them. He walked home faster than usual, heart beating, brain on fire. He didn't open his phone. He didn't lie on his bed. He didn't waste time talking about his problems. He opened his notebook, the same small notebook filled with English words, sentences, and dreams. But now, this time, he wrote something different. He didn't write more vocabulary. He wrote a new identity. I am becoming a successful person. I am building a powerful mind. English is my tool. Discipline is my weapon. No one will save me. I will build myself. Reading those words, he felt something he had never felt before. Responsibility. He finally understood a painful truth. Nobody was coming to rescue him. No teacher, no boss, no rich friend, no government, no miracle. And for most people, that realization is terrifying. But for him, it was freeing. Because when nobody is responsible for your life, that means you are. From that day on, his English learning was no longer just about language. It became a symbol. Every new word he learned was proof that his brain was growing. Every sentence he spoke was proof that he was leaving the old version of himself behind. He didn't just practice English anymore. He practiced becoming a new person. He mixed English with mindset. Instead of repeating random sentences, he started repeating powerful ones. I am in control of my life. My future is created by my actions. I do hard things. I will not live a small life. He said them while walking, while eating, while looking in the mirror, while feeling tired, while feeling afraid. These sentences became his new blood, and something strange started to happen. People around him noticed. They couldn't explain it. They didn't know what exactly was different, but they felt it in his presence. The way he stood, the way he listened, the way he spoke. He was still the same person, but he wasn't the same energy. Before, he tried to be invisible. Now, he was becoming impossible to ignore. In class, the teacher started asking him more questions. Not because he was the best student, but because he was the most serious one, the most focused one, the most alive one. And when he didn't know something, he didn't feel ashamed anymore. He felt excited. Excited to learn. Excited to improve. Excited to grow. Because rich-minded people don't see "I don't know" as weakness. They see it as an open door. He became addicted to progress. Not big progress. Just small, daily improvement. One new word. One better sentence. One clear pronunciation. One brave conversation. That is how real transformation happens. Not in days, but in decisions made again and again. One evening, he stood again in front of the same mirror where he once doubted himself. The same face looked back at him, but the eyes were different. The eyes were no longer asking, "Why is my life so hard?" They were now asking, "What is my next level?" And that question, that single question, separates successful people from the rest of the world. Unsuccessful people ask, "Why me? Why is life unfair? Why am I not lucky?" Successful people ask, "What can I do next? How can I become better? Who must I become to reach that life?" At that moment, he finally understood what it really means to think like rich people. It is not only about money. It is about mindset. It is about responsibility. It is about vision. Rich people don't live only in the present moment. They live in the future first, in their mind. Then their body follows. And that night, before sleeping, he whispered a promise to himself. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, honestly, and seriously. I am no longer available for a small life. And when you say something like that, and mean it with your entire soul, the world begins to move differently around you. Chapter 4: When the old world tried to pull him back. The moment a person truly decides to change, the world around him does not clap in celebration. It does the opposite. It begins to test him in silent, uncomfortable, and sometimes painful ways. That was something he did not learn from any book. He learned it from experience. from the heavy feeling in his chest when life suddenly started to feel harder instead of easier. It was almost as if the universe was asking him a question. Are you serious? Or is this just a phase? And the most terrifying part was that the question did not come in words. It came in events. Small distractions turned into big temptations. Familiar voices from his old life returned. Friends who once laughed with him started to laugh at him. They did not understand why he now carried an English book everywhere, why he no longer joined their meaningless gossip, why he preferred silence and learning over noise and entertainment. They called him different as if it were an insult, as if becoming different was something negative. But in his mind, slowly, painfully, powerfully, that word began to turn into a compliment. Different meant growing. Different meant evolving. Different meant he was leaving an old version of himself behind. One evening, as he sat alone in his small room with the light of a single lamp creating soft shadows on the wall, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, doubt returning, like a ghost from the past. The new, stronger part of him had been speaking loudly for weeks. You are becoming better. You are leveling up. You are thinking like rich people. But that night, the weak voice, the old voice, the voice of fear and small thinking, whispered again. It said, you are alone now. You don't belong with them anymore. And you don't belong with successful people either. Who do you think you are trying to become? The words were quiet, but they were sharp. They hit deeper than any insult from other people because they came from inside his own mind. And for a few minutes, he believed them. His hand stopped moving on the page. His eyes stared at the same English sentence again and again without understanding it. The room felt heavier. The future felt less clear. This was the real battlefield. Not a classroom. Not a job interview. Not a public stage. The real battlefield was inside his own head, between the man he used to be and the man he was trying to become. He remembered something his teacher once said. You are not struggling because you are weak. You are struggling because you are changing. That sentence came back to him like a lifeline. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He understood that what he was experiencing was not failure, it was resistance. Every old habit, every old belief, every old fear was fighting for survival. They were trying to pull him back into the life they knew. A small life, a familiar life, a limited life. And suddenly he realized something important. Comfort is not always safe. Sometimes comfort is the most dangerous prison of all. He stood up and walked to the mirror. The same reflection, but a new conversation. He looked into his own eyes, and for the first time he did not speak in his native language. He spoke in English, slowly, clearly, honestly. I am not going back. I am moving forward. I am creating a new life, even if I am the only one walking this path. The words were not perfect. The pronunciation was not perfect. The grammar was not perfect. But the meaning was powerful. And for the first time, he understood that English was no longer just a subject to study. It was the language of the new person he was becoming. Every English sentence was a step away from his old limitations. Every English word was a brick in the foundation of his future. The next day, the test came in another form. A friend from his past invited him to spend the day wasting time, doing nothing valuable, escaping reality for a few hours. The old version of him would have accepted without thinking. But now he felt the weight of choice. He felt the power of decision. Rich people are not controlled by their environment. They control their direction. He wanted to say yes. The comfort of familiarity was tempting. But his future whispered louder. If you want a new life, you must choose a new way. And so, for the first time in his life, he respectfully said no. One simple word. 2 letters. But inside that word was a new universe. No. That moment hurt. Felt lonely. Felt strange. Felt uncomfortable. But behind the pain was something stronger, pride. Because for the first time, he had chosen his future over his feelings. That is what successful people do. They do not make decisions based on emotion. They make decisions based on direction. From that day on, he built a new discipline around his English learning. Not just random practice, but intentional practice. He began listening to English every morning, even when he didn't feel like it. He repeated sentences until his mouth felt tired. He wrote long paragraphs in English, even when his hand cramped. He practiced thinking in English even when his thoughts felt slow and broken. And what most people do not understand is this: confidence does not come first. Action comes first. Confidence is created from repetition, from evidence, from proof, from showing your own brain again and again that you are serious about change. Slowly, very slowly, the language that once scared him began to feel familiar. The words that once confused him began to feel like friends. The grammar that once looked impossible began to follow a pattern. His mind was adapting. Just like a muscle grows when it is pushed, his brain was expanding under the pressure of discipline. And deep down, a new identity was forming. He was no longer a person trying to learn English. He was becoming a person who lives in two languages. A person who thinks beyond borders. A person who thinks beyond his environment. A person who thinks like rich people. Another powerful realization came to him during a quiet walk one afternoon. Rich people are not people who never feel doubt or fear. They feel it. They hear it. They just do not bow to it. They do not allow it to decide their future. And in that realization, he felt a strange kind of freedom. He no longer needed to wait for fear to disappear. He could move forward with fear. He could grow while still feeling uncertain. He could rise while still shaking inside. That understanding was more powerful than motivation. It was maturity. The world outside had not changed. The city was the same. The streets were the same. The sky was the same. The people were the same. But inside him, an entire empire was being built. Brick by brick, word by word, thought by thought. And one final truth settled into his heart at the end of that chapter of his life. Thinking like rich people is not about pretending to be someone else. It is about becoming who you were always meant to be, but were too afraid to believe in. And now he was no longer afraid. Not of English, not of challenges, not of the future, because he finally understood that the only thing standing between him and the life he dreamed of was the version of himself he had already outgrown. And he was never going back. Chapter 5: The Lonely Road of Growth. Growth is beautiful, but it is also lonely. Nobody tells you that part. People talk about success, about dreams, about becoming better, but they rarely talk about the silence that follows you when you stop living like everyone else. And now, as his world began to change from the inside out, the loneliness became louder than ever. He started noticing that conversations around him felt empty. The same jokes, the same complaints, the same excuses, the same dreams that never turned into action. When people spoke, it was as if he was listening to the past. A past he was slowly walking away from. He could feel a gap growing, invisible but real, between him and the people he once felt close to. And that gap hurt more than any insult. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was simply distance. At night, when the world fell quiet and the distractions disappeared, he felt it most strongly. Loneliness does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it is just a soft, heavy silence sitting beside you while you try to focus on something bigger than your current life. He would sit at his small table, the English book in front of him, a pen in his hand, and for a moment he would wonder, is anyone else walking this road? Or am I walking it alone? But even in that lonely silence, there was a strange kind of strength, because he started to understand that to grow fast, sometimes you must grow alone. Trees that rise highest often stand alone in open fields where there is no other shadow to block their light. And he, in his own quiet way, was becoming one of those trees. He sacrificed things that once felt important. Late-night entertainment, comfort, mindless conversations, even sleep. While others were resting in the ease of their familiar lives, he was pushing his limits in the darkness, whispering English words into the air like a prayer. He recorded his own voice and listened to it with painful honesty. He heard every mistake, every awkward pause, every broken sentence. And each time, instead of feeling ashamed, he felt hungry. Hungry to improve. Hungry to correct himself. Hungry to become better the next day than he was the day before. That hunger scared him sometimes. because it was not a normal hunger. It was not a simple desire. It was an obsession with growth, an obsession with self-mastery, an obsession with becoming more than his past. He started reading stories of successful people in English, slowly at first, then faster. He looked at their lives not like a fan, but like a student examining a map. He noticed patterns, discipline, sacrifice, consistency, long focus, delayed pleasure. These were not just words. They were principles. And he realized that rich thinking was not something you are born with. It is something you practice daily, just like a language. One day, in the middle of his practice, something unexpected happened. He was reading a paragraph in English, a long one, complex, filled with words that once terrified him, and he understood it. Not just some words, not just the general meaning. He understood it clearly. The meaning flowed into his mind without translation, without struggle, without fear. For a long moment he just stared at the page. The room around him disappeared. The noise of the world faded away. It was just him and that realization. He had crossed an invisible line. Tears filled his eyes, not because the paragraph was emotional, but because he was. Because that single moment proved something that years of doubt could never erase again. I am capable. Not in the future. Not one day. Not someday. Now. He remembered the boy who was afraid to speak. The boy who believed he was not smart enough. The boy who looked at successful people and thought, that is not for me. And in that moment, he felt both pain and respect for that old version of himself. Pain for the years of self-doubt. Respect for the fact that he did not stay that way. He walked to the mirror again. This mirror had witnessed every stage of his transformation. Every fear, every promise, every breakthrough. And in English, with a voice that was no longer shaking, he said, I kept my promise to you. Those words hit deeper than anything he had ever heard from another person, because they were spoken to himself. And when you earn your own respect, you become unstoppable. But with that breakthrough came a new level of awareness. He realized that growth was not a straight line. That was only the first mountain. There were many more ahead. Bigger ones, harder ones, ones that would require more sacrifice, more loneliness, more discipline. And strangely, that didn't scare him anymore. It excited him, because the person he was becoming did not fear challenges. He was built by them. The small room that once felt like a cage was now a training ground. The silence that once felt lonely was now sacred. The struggle that once felt unfair was now meaningful. He was no longer just learning English. He was mastering his own mind. And the biggest emotional truth of all slowly wrapped itself around his heart. Some people wait their whole lives for motivation. Others become obsessed with growth and create a life that motivates others. He knew, without anyone having to tell him, that he was becoming the second kind. And far away, in a future he could now almost see, there were people he had never met, lives he had never touched, who were going to be inspired simply because he chose not to give up in this quiet, lonely room. That thought alone made every sacrifice worth it. And yet, the greatest test was still coming. Because when you start to rise, life does not just test your discipline. It tests your heart. Tests your identity. It tests whether you truly believe you deserve more or whether deep down you are still afraid of your own potential. Chapter 6: The Quiet Breakthrough. In the beginning, you believed that learning English was only about vocabulary lists, grammar rules, and correct pronunciation. You thought that one day, if you just memorized enough words, something magical would happen and you would suddenly become fluent. But now, standing in this moment of quiet change, you start to see the truth. English was never just a language. It was a mirror, a discipline, a test of who you really were when no one was watching. For weeks, maybe even months, nothing felt different. You listened. You repeated. You shadowed sentences again and again. Your tongue felt heavy. Your thoughts felt slow. Sometimes, you questioned yourself, am I even improving? The world around you moved fast, and you felt stuck in a small room, talking to your own voice, making mistakes that no one applauded. But something unusual happened in the silence. One evening, while walking down the street, Your mind started to think in English without permission. Simple sentences at first. The sky is dark today. I need to be stronger. Keep going. You stopped walking. You looked around as if someone else had spoken. But it was you. For the first time, English didn't feel like a foreign visitor in your mind. It felt familiar, like a quiet friend who had always been there, waiting for you to listen. That moment was your first real breakthrough. Not loud, not dramatic, no fireworks, just a gentle shift inside your brain. You realized that you were no longer translating every word from your native language. Meaning started to appear directly. You didn't search for sentences anymore. They started to come to you. Imperfect, yes, but real, alive, honest. And with that realization came another one that was even more powerful. You were not just learning English. You were becoming someone new. Every time you chose to practice instead of sleeping, scrolling, or complaining, you were building discipline. Every time you spoke in English, even when your voice was shaking, you were building courage. Every time you made a mistake and still continued, you were building resilience. Language shaped your mind, and your mind was shaping your future. You started to notice changes in the way you saw the world. You listened to people more carefully. You tried to understand, not just reply. You became more patient with yourself, because English taught you that growth does not happen in a straight line. It happens in circles, in struggles, in silent hours when the world sleeps and you are still whispering words into the darkness. There was still loneliness, but it felt different now. This loneliness was no longer empty. It was filled with purpose. While others were entertained, you were educating yourself. While others were escaping reality, you were building a new one. While others were afraid of being different, you had already accepted that greatness requires separation. You became obsessed, but not in a desperate way. In a devoted way, like an artist in love with his craft. Like a warrior in love with his training. You watched English videos not for fun, but for transformation. You repeated phrases not because someone forced you, but because your soul needed them. You wrote sentences in a notebook not because of homework, but because it was rewriting the story of your life. And the more you mastered English, the more you mastered yourself. You became more confident, more expressive, more aware. Your world grew bigger. New ideas entered your mind. New dreams formed in your heart. You no longer said, I can't. Now you said, I'm still learning. That one sentence changed everything. Because I can't is a closed door. I'm still learning is an open road. You understood that fluency was not the destination. Growth was the destination. And growth has no limit. In a quiet room one night, you spoke for 10 full minutes in English about your dreams, your past, your struggles, your future. No script, no subtitles, only you and your voice. When you finished, tears came to your eyes. Not because your English was perfect, but because you were no longer the same person who had once been afraid to even start. This was your true breakthrough. Not in language, but in identity. You were no longer just a learner. You were becoming a thinker, a dreamer, a different human being. And deep inside, you knew, if you could change your voice, you could change your life. Chapter 6 didn't end with perfection. It ended with power. The power to continue. The power to grow. The power to believe. And the journey was only getting deeper. Chapter 7, The Battle Inside the Mind. There comes a stage in every serious learner's journey where the real enemy is not the language, not the accent, not the complicated grammar. The real enemy is the mind. By the time you reached this point, you already knew enough English to survive basic conversations. You could understand videos, read posts, form sentences, and express ideas. But something invisible began to block your path. It wasn't a lack of knowledge. It was doubt. Subtle, quiet, dangerous. The same voice that once whispered, "You can't do this," now returned in a new form, more sophisticated, more convincing. It said, "Maybe this is enough. Maybe fluency is not for you. Maybe you should stop here." And for a moment you listened. You felt tired. You felt like you were walking alone in a world that didn't even notice your effort. You began to compare yourself with others who seemed more confident, more fluent, more natural. You watched them speak so freely and you asked yourself painful questions. Why am I still slow? Why do I still hesitate? Why is this so hard for me? Those questions didn't just attack your English. They attacked your identity, your worth, your future. And in that darkness, you realized something even deeper. Learning English had never been the hardest part. Believing you were worthy of fluency was. Every word you learned had opened a new mental door. But behind each door was another version of yourself you had to confront. The insecure version. The scared version. The version that had been silenced for years. English was no longer just a subject, it was therapy. It was healing. It was war and peace happening inside your chest at the same time. Some days you wanted to disappear. Other days you felt a burning fire that no one could extinguish. You kept showing up anyway, even when your voice felt weak, even when motivation was gone, even when your hands felt empty. You remembered something important then. Rich and successful people do not act based on feelings. They act based on commitment. And in that realization, a new level of power entered you. You started to treat your English practice like oxygen. Not optional. Not flexible. Not emotional. Necessary. You spoke even when you didn't want to. You read even when your eyes felt heavy. You listened even when your brain felt tired. And slowly, your mind began to obey you instead of controlling you. Something powerful happens when you refuse to quit in silence. The world doesn't see it. No one claps. No one posts it. But inside, your mental muscles grow stronger every single day. You became sharper, faster, more aware of your own thoughts. You caught negative ideas before they could build a home in your mind. You replaced them with stronger words, better sentences, higher beliefs. You didn't just upgrade your English vocabulary, you upgraded your thinking vocabulary. Failure became feedback. Slow became steady. Impossible became not yet. These words shaped your new reality. You started standing differently, walking differently, even breathing differently. You were not just learning how to speak English. You were learning how to speak to yourself. There was still loneliness. Of course there was. Growth is lonely by nature. Weak minds gather in crowds. Strong minds are often built in isolation. But now you no longer feared the silence. You used it. You sat with your thoughts, with your notebook, with your voice in the quiet room. You had deep conversations, not with people, but with your future. You spoke in English not only to practice, but to declare who you were becoming. I will be fluent. I will be confident. I will speak on big stages. My voice will travel beyond borders. My story will inspire others. And every time you said these words, your heart believed them a little more. Then something incredible happened. One day, someone spoke to you in English, and you answered without fear. No hesitation, no overthinking, no apology, just you and your truth. In that moment, the world around you didn't change. But you did. You realized that you were no longer asking for permission to speak. You had claimed that right through discipline, sacrifice, and relentless devotion. English had become part of your identity, part of your thinking, part of your confidence, part of your power. And in that moment, you also understood something even greater than language. The person you were becoming could never fit into the life you used to live. You had outgrown your old mindset, your old fears, your old excuses. You were thinking like successful people now, choosing discomfort over comfort, choosing growth over entertainment, choosing the long road over the easy one. Chapter 7 was not just about progress. It was about transformation through pain, silence, discipline, and belief. And deep inside you felt the truth. If this much change came from one language, imagine what the rest of your life could become. And the journey still wasn't over. In fact, it was just entering its most powerful phase. Chapter 8, when the world starts to answer you. There is a moment in every transformation story when the outside world begins to quietly respond to the inner work you have been doing in silence. And this was the moment you were now stepping into. For a long time, your progress had been invisible. No one saw the hours you spent repeating the same sentences until your throat went dry. No one felt the frustration of your mistakes. No one understood the loneliness of choosing growth while others chose comfort. But now something was shifting. Conversations in English no longer felt like a battlefield. They felt like doors opening. You began to understand jokes, emotions, hidden meanings in words. You began to feel the language instead of just translating it. It wasn't just sound anymore. It had color, emotion, rhythm, and intention. English started to flow through you like a river that had finally broken free from a frozen heart. And with that flow came a strange and beautiful realization. The world was bigger than you ever imagined, and for the first time, you felt brave enough to step into it. You noticed how people reacted to you differently. They listened when you spoke. They didn't look confused by your words. They were drawn to your energy. You weren't just speaking English, you were communicating confidence, vision, and self-belief. And the crazy part was, this confidence didn't come from perfection. It came from progress. It came from knowing how far you had traveled alone. It came from remembering the old version of yourself who was afraid to even say one sentence, and comparing that to the person who now could hold a full conversation without apologizing for existing. That sense of growth filled your chest with something powerful. Pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet, respectful pride of a warrior who knew the cost of every small victory. Yet, with growth came another level of emotional challenge. You started to feel disconnected from the life and people you once knew. Old conversations felt small. Old excuses felt heavy and uninteresting. You realized you were no longer on the same frequency as the version of yourself who once doubted everything. And this separation hurt. Growth always has a price. Sometimes that price is friendships. Sometimes it is comfort. Sometimes it is the illusion of belonging. There were nights when you stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of that distance. You wondered if the path you had chosen was worth the loneliness. And in that silence, a new truth whispered back to you. You were not meant to stay the same. You were meant to expand. And expansion is uncomfortable. It stretches your mind, your heart, your identity. But it also makes space for a future far greater than your past. To fill the emptiness, you went deeper into English, but now not just as a student, as a creator. You started thinking in English, dreaming in English. You imagined future conversations, speeches, travels, opportunities, interviews, friendships across countries you had never even seen. You wrote your goals in English. You spoke your affirmations in English. The language had become the voice of your future self. Every word you practiced was no longer just for today. It was for the person you were becoming tomorrow. And with every sentence, you were programming your mind for success. You were aligning your thoughts with a bigger life. You also began to understand people at a deeper level. Because learning a language is learning humanity. You saw how emotions were universal, how pain and hope existed in every culture, just spoken in different sounds. That awareness made you softer and stronger at the same time. You became more empathetic, more observant, more powerful in a quiet way. You no longer felt small in this world. You felt connected to it, and connection gave you courage. One day, as you listened to your own voice in a recording, you barely recognized it. It was clearer, stronger, more certain, not just in pronunciation but in spirit. And that's when it hit you. English didn't just change the way you speak. It changed the way you exist. It made you braver. It made you more expressive. It made you believe that your ideas mattered, that your story deserved to be heard, that your voice was not a mistake. This chapter of your life was no longer about overcoming fear. It was about stepping into power. You were no longer chasing fluency. Fluency was starting to follow you. You were no longer asking, "Can I?" You were declaring, "I am." And somewhere deep inside, beyond all doubt, beyond all pain, beyond all loneliness, you finally understood something that only the strongest minds ever realize. The world doesn't open for the most talented. It opens for the most committed. And you had become one of them. Chapter 8 didn't just grow your English. It expanded your world. Chapter 9, the moment you finally see yourself. There is a strange, powerful moment in personal transformation when the world stops feeling like a battlefield and begins to feel like a reflection. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you become stronger. This was the moment you were now living in. You didn't notice it all at once. There was no dramatic announcement, no sudden celebration. It revealed itself in the smallest details of your life. In the way you stood, in the way you looked people in the eyes, in the way you spoke. Slower, clearer, more intentional, more alive. You weren't rushing your words anymore. You weren't apologizing for your accent. You weren't hiding your voice behind silence. For the first time in your life, you were present in your own language. And that presence changed everything around you without you even trying. Your mind, once filled with confusion, excuses, and fear, had grown quiet. Not empty, but focused, calm, directed. The chaos that used to live inside you had slowly been replaced by clarity. You had discipline now. You had routine. You had vision. English practice wasn't something you forced yourself to do anymore. It had become part of who you were, like breathing, like thinking, like dreaming. Words no longer felt heavy. They felt natural. They felt honest. They felt yours. And that was the greatest gift of all. You finally owned your voice. You started speaking up more. In conversations. In opportunities. In moments where the old version of you would have stayed silent. Now, when ideas came to your mind, you didn't bury them. You expressed them. You trusted yourself. And the world started responding differently. People asked for your opinion. They waited for your words. They respected your presence. Not because you demanded it, but because confidence had quietly wrapped itself around you like an invisible crown. But with that confidence came a wave of memories. You remembered the nights of doubt, the days of frustration, the moments you almost quit, the times you cried in silence because you felt like you were not good enough. All of it came rushing back, not as pain but as proof. Proof that you had survived the hard parts. Proof that you had kept going when it would have been easier to disappear. Proof that you were no longer the same person who started this journey. And in that realization, something inside you broke open in the most beautiful way. You forgave yourself. You forgave the old you who was scared to try. You forgave the mistakes. You forgave the broken pronunciation. You forgave the slow progress. You forgave the self-doubt. You realized that version of you was not weak. They were just untrained. And you had trained them into strength. This is what learning English had really done. It had forced you to meet yourself at your lowest and rebuild yourself from the inside out. It had stripped away your excuses, confronted your fears, challenged your discipline, tested your patience, and in return, it gave you identity, purpose, confidence, direction. You no longer admired successful people from a distance. You were starting to look like one. The way you thought now was different. You no longer thought in limitations. You thought in decisions. You didn't ask, "Can I?" You asked, "How will I?" You didn't blame circumstances. You adjusted strategies. You didn't wait for motivation. You relied on habit, on consistency, on character. The mindset of successful people was no longer a theory you read about. It was a mindset you lived inside. English had been your training ground, your battlefield, your teacher, your fire. And through that fire, you had been forged into something new. Now, when you looked in the mirror, you didn't just see a learner. You saw someone with a future that could not be ignored. You saw a speaker, a creator, a leader in their own life. And that reflection didn't scare you anymore. It inspired you. Chapter 9 was the chapter of recognition. Recognition of your power. Recognition of your growth. Recognition of your voice. Recognition of your new identity. You finally understood the deepest truth of all. You were never learning English to impress the world. You were learning English to meet the real version of yourself. And now that you had finally met them, there was no turning back. Chapter 10, the voice that redefined your destiny. There is a moment in every transformational journey when you stop asking for change and finally become the change. That moment does not arrive with noise. It does not come with applause. It does not knock on your door or announce itself to the world. It simply appears one quiet day, and when it does, your entire life separates into two clear chapters, before and after. This was that moment for you. The final chapter did not feel like an end. It felt like a beginning that was too powerful to be measured in time. You were no longer a person trying to learn English. You were a person living in a new identity created by English, shaped by discipline, carved by sacrifice, forged by patience, and fueled by belief. For so long, English had felt like a mountain standing in front of you, impossible to climb. Every step felt lonely. Every mistake felt heavy. Every silence felt like failure. But now, when you looked back, that mountain no longer looked frightening. It looked sacred. It had trained you, strengthened you, humbled you, and by surviving it, you had proven something to yourself that no diploma, no certificate, no applause could ever replace. You were capable of transforming your reality through nothing but consistency and courage. You had built a new mind, a mind that does not run from discomfort, a mind that does not fear mistakes, a mind that does not depend on motivation, a mind that moves on discipline. And that mind now spoke English not just as a skill but as a language of power. When you spoke, it was not only sentences that came out. It was history. It was struggle. It was nights alone. It was endless repetition. It was self-doubt and self-belief fighting inside the same heart, until belief finally won. Every word you spoke now carried weight. Every sentence had meaning. Every conversation was not just communication. It was a declaration. I survived myself. People around you started noticing the change more clearly now. Not just in your language, but in your energy. You walked differently. You listened differently. You chose your words carefully. You chose your time carefully. You no longer wasted minutes on things that did not serve your growth. You were thinking like successful people. You were protecting your mind, feeding it knowledge, challenging it daily. You were no longer a consumer of content. You were a creator of direction. And that shift made you dangerous in the best possible way. Because the world is not ruled by the loud. It is ruled by the disciplined. And you had become disciplined. You understood that English was only the beginning. The real fluency you had achieved was not linguistic, it was mental. You were fluent in self-control, fluent in long-term thinking, fluent in delayed gratification, fluent in sacrifice, fluent in resilience. Those were the real languages of success. English had just been the door that led you into that world. You no longer asked, "What if I fail?" You now asked, "What if this is only the beginning?" You started seeing opportunities that you would have never even noticed before. Jobs, travel, global connections, education, influence. Your world was no longer limited by the borders of your hometown or the boundaries of your past. Your voice could travel now. Your ideas could move. Your story could reach people who were just like the old version of you. Lost, confused, scared, silent. And that's when a new purpose was born inside you. It was no longer just about you. It was about them. The ones who are still afraid to start. The ones who still say, "I am bad at English." The ones who still believe success is for other people. The ones who feel invisible. You became their proof. Not because you were perfect, but because you refused to quit. You wanted them to know what you now knew. That fluency is not talent. It is training. That confidence is not personality. It is practice. That success is not luck. It is a decision repeated daily. And English is not just a language. It is a bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. This chapter was not the end of a story. It was the foundation of a legacy. You had walked through fear. You had faced your silence. You had trained your voice. You had shaped your mind. And now, standing at the edge of this new version of yourself, you understood the final truth clearly, deeply, painfully, beautifully. You didn't learn English to change your life. You learned English because you were finally ready to change your life. And now, there is only one thing left to do. Continue. Grow more. Speak louder. Dream bigger. And never, ever go back to the small life you once accepted. Because you are not that person anymore. You think like successful people now. You speak like successful people now. And soon you will live like successful people too. If this story touched your heart, inspired your mindset, and made you feel the power of learning English through real-life emotion. Don't stop here. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful English learning stories. Like this video if you believe growth comes from discipline. Comment, "I will not quit," if you are ready to upgrade your life through English and mindset. Share this with someone who is still afraid to start, because your new life begins with one more sentence and one more brave step. Keep learning, keep growing, keep speaking. Your voice is no longer small.